Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most incomplete work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
Wah, wah. I'm Elliot Diebold.
Uh,
That's my
we'll
teaser
get to
for
that
our
later.
upcoming dad.
That's your teaser for Duff After Dark. Yeah, we're coming to you live in the Discord. Sorry, that really threw me off, Elliot. We're coming to you live in the Discord, folks. I guess we'll remind one final time. We're doing these as live recordings now, so I'm watching people post rocket ship emoji in chat right now. And if you want to see what's going on, you gotta get into the Discord. So go to duffmedia.com/Discord and you can join the fun.
Yeah, that said, this is also the time where we should announce we are not doing that next week.
Oh yes, true.
So we won't be doing a live recording next week, unfortunately. Between the reflecting episode and just some in real life stuff, we're not going to have time, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's my sister's wedding next weekend, so recording schedule is going to be a little bit hectic. But
Pretty good reason.
hopefully it should. Yeah, yeah. Anywho, one other thing, as you previously teased, I suppose we should mention that
Wah, wah.
for those of us who are listening live, got that noise. For those of us who are listening live, we're going to be recording a Doof After Dark immediately after this chapter, so you get a bit of a free teaser of that. For everyone who's not listening live, if you want to catch that, you'll need to be a patron. And I'll tell you, the teaser for it is we're going to be talking about some stuff, but I also am going to tell a story that I am very excited to tell about somebody that revealed to me a behavior that they regularly do that is maybe the craziest thing I've ever heard of somebody doing that is like not actively harmful to it. Like the craziest thing that a normal person could do. It's really wild. And I'm really excited to share it with you, Elliot. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
Yeah, you teased this in the Discord like a couple of days ago, and I have been sort of stewing on it, and I have no fucking clue where it's going. I can't wait.
I genuinely, I said this before in the Discord, and I'll say it again. People can think of the craziest things that they can think of, and this will beat it. It's something that is just, yeah. Anyway, I'm excited to get to it.
Yeah. Last piece of house cleaning. Costume contest. It's, I think, Halloween very soon after we're recording this. You've got about a week left to get costumes and stuff in. We've had a couple come in already, I think. So, the competition's heating up. Get your costume in as you get dressed for Halloween.
Yeah. I mean, we're recording this on Halloween right now, so I'm very much in the mood for some spooky costumes.
Oh, it's the 31st already. God.
Yeah, it goes quick, doesn't it?
Get my shit together.
Let's get into the chapters, shall we?
Sure.
Starting with Fallout 14:6. We're in Lucy's head. Lucy's having a conversation with Jeremy, and he kind of expands on / reveals just how much he's not looking for a casual relationship with Verona, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I mean, just to sort of, before we get into the content of this conversation, I love it as a bit of a setup because, like, Avery aside, as she's want to end up, I feel like we can pretty confidently say that Lucy and Jeremy represent, like, Verona's two human attachments, like the only important human attachments that she has.
Yeah.
Like, you could view Lucy and Jeremy talking stuff out as like the coalition of we want Verona to stay at least a little bit human. Yeah, I mean, sort of opening this with Lucy saying, "Oh, the fetch is no substitute for the real thing," is just really sort of setting this tone of like these are our two people who like Verona as she is and wouldn't want her to change too much, like, or there are things about her they don't want to change. And they are two people who she's kind of avoiding the most in a way because they're the two who the fetch don't work for. So, this is the whole thing with the fetch and Verona's current strategy is the people
Yeah,
it kind of
interesting.
affects are the ones who are closest to her.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Like the people who actually care the most are the ones who are hit the most by the fetch in a very interesting way. I think that's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, like thinking of the fetch as like a trial run for what a less human Verona looks like, it's obviously pretty grim, right? Like her friends don't want to hang out with her. They see it as an inherently disappointing thing. So
Yeah, well, and it's funny because like Jeremy's kind of copying up worse than Lucy in a way. Maybe that's arguable, but like for Jeremy, he
mm.
just thinks Verona's being like giving him the cold shoulder, whereas like Lucy sort of knows better and is trying to make sure he doesn't like profess his love to the fetch or, or something like terrible like that.
Yeah.
Um, but actually, in a way, I suppose it might be worse for Lucy because she knows the extent to which Verona is avoiding them.
Mm.
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
knowing it's a fetch maybe actually doesn't make it better.
Yeah, true. Um, yeah, I mean, like, just to jump back to the meat of this conversation, though, like, we've kind of been thinking about whether Jeremy actually wants what Verona wants, and this pretty clearly seems like it's starting to say no, he doesn't. He is settling for it, right? And this is just like a very human struggle for Verona to navigate at a time when she really doesn't care for human struggles, right?
Yeah, you've got to worry that, like, when faced with this sort of decision, she might just snap and run away from humanity.
100%. It feels like the exact kind of thing where she's just going to put it off and put it off until it blows up,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, that said, I feel like we said exactly this in like arc 10, like almost word for word. So
Mm.
we'll see, I guess. Like, she's gotten around it before.
Yeah,
But
true. She's exceeded expectations in some nice ways before, so hopefully she can do that again.
yeah. But no, you're right. Like Jeremy basically goes on a monologue here about how he's been like head over heels in love with Verona for a long time now. And I particularly love this as a kind of evil test on Wildbow's end to sort of put in front of Lucy because Lucy is sort of actively trying at this point not to step on Verona's toes, especially with regards to Jeremy. So, like Jeremy coming up to
Uh,
her and
uh,
saying,
especially
"Hey,
with
you were
regards to
totally right. Yeah,
it,
you were
it
totally right last arc. I am actually in love with Verona, and I'm on the trajectory to maybe getting hurt, or this could go wrong." It's such a fun dilemma to put in front of Lucy.
Yeah, like the stuff that she's crossed the line on is explicitly her trying to tell Verona that Jeremy cares for her more than their arrangement allows for. And that's explicitly what this is. So it's like the exact thing that she's trying to take a step back from. It's so mean.
Yeah, and yeah, it's also just I really like it because it never really crosses Lucy's mind. I think there would be room for Lucy to have Jeremy say this to her and basically think in herself like, "I told you so." Um,
Yeah,
but
100%.
sh- she doesn't at all. Like her focus is just on making sure that Jeremy and Verona don't get hurt and that she doesn't upset Verona. So she's very you can tell Lucy's really holding back, trying to not like tell Jeremy to talk to her about it too aggressively or anything like that.
Yeah, she does well. She exercises a good solid amount of restraint while not being too much of a jerk to Jeremy, basically.
Yeah, and that's really something she's juggling with a lot in this like whole chapter. Really is this figuring out the line of how she can interact with Verona in a way that doesn't push her further away, but is also not just like letting her get away with murder.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to call out though that like I know that from Verona's perspective, she's very much avoiding people like Lucy with this idea that she doesn't want to like drag them into her shit and hurt them. But like she's got to be smart enough to know that that's not what's actually happening. Like there's definitely I think it's fair to call some of what Verona's doing here like a bit selfish and uncaring to just I don't know toss away
Yeah,
like,
I think
the
so.
the level of friendship with Lucy and Jeremy and stuff, and just avoid them like this. I think it's fair to say that that's somewhat selfish. Yeah, I don't know. Skirting the line between toxic levels of selfishness maybe, but, like, I think I like, this is exactly what Verona went through in her nightmare in, like, arc 4 or whatever it was, like, when Alpi put her through the nightmare with Melissa. Like, I remember one of the big things in that nightmare was Verona was pushing, like, Lucy and stuff away, and I she's kinda making that self-fulfilling prophecy thing happen of, like, in trying to avoid it, she's
Mm.
kind of still doing that.
Yeah, I really think I think what Verona is doing is good for her mental health in some ways, right? But she is
Yeah.
doing it in a way that's very like she's not she hasn't said to Jeremy or said to Lucy like, well, to Lucy kind of knows the story, but she could say something to Jeremy like, "Oh, I've got a lot going on, so I need to just kind of
Yeah.
withdraw into myself for 2 weeks," right? Or something like that that would give Jeremy a reason to understand what's going on without necessarily telling him everything, but also give her some space to do her processing and healing, and that would be like a way to still have that, but in a way that is at least more intentional. Whereas what she's doing is kind of like, it feels like she just thinks she can juggle a million plates, and I mean, it's gonna blow up. I don't know. I mean, like, these are lessons that are hard to learn, even as you
Yeah.
are older than 13. So I'm not gonna be too harsh on Verona for it.
Oh yeah, I'd be lying if I said I haven't made this exact mistake in the recent past even.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so yeah, I just like it definitely it just sort of feels like there's room for somebody to try and get a hold of Verona and be like, you realize that what you're doing is kind of shitty, right? Like, and not the whole thing. Like, I think we've
Yeah,
discussed
but
there's really positive sides to what Verona is doing in the Undercity. It's just some of the ways she's going about it. It's just like, oh, you could
yes.
do this a lot better.
Well, the thing is, should Lucy be that person? Like, that's the question, because
Yeah.
just the fact that Jeremy has told Lucy this implicitly means I think Verona's going to be upset at her. Like, there's no way for her to avoid Verona's immediate gut reaction or immediate check of like, Lucy's gotten involved again. Like, Verona's just
Yeah.
definitely going to have that reaction, and it's not Lucy's fault at all. But now that we're here, what should Lucy do is the question, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, like, she goes the soft route of like, hey, make sure you chat to Jeremy. I told you it's pretty important. And I don't know. I feel like I guess that's a strategy. It just feels, I feel like there's a no-win situation for Lucy here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. Because I'm the same. Usually, in these sorts of situations, I'm extremely like pro tell them. Like I would usually be telling Jeremy to talk to her, or I would be
To speak to Verona,
um
yeah.
yeah, speaking to Verona and like getting her to talk to him about it or whatever. But yeah, Lucy is like the one person who cannot do that right now because of the shit her and Verona went through last arc. But that comes with the added side effect of Lucy's kind of the only one who could tell Verona. So, like, this is just sort of, I think, yeah, the consequence of Verona cutting herself off like this is she's now in a situation where
Yeah.
she doesn't have anyone who can talk to her about this stuff.
Yeah. 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 I want to also call out. There's this there's this moment where Jeremy's like, "Oh, I bet a lot of guys would kill to be in a situation like this with a girl," and Lucy's like, "Oh yeah, probably." And I mean, come on, Lucy, you really had an opportunity to dismantle some toxic masculinity there. Jeremy, men are allowed to have feelings too, and not just be obsessed with sex. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, can't blame him for media programming him to think that it's
Of
meant to be
course.
the other way around. But yeah, I don't, yeah, it's heartbreaking because I think like Jeremy not being that classic meathead sex oriented guy is why we like him. So it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
don't say that, Jeremy.
Yeah. But anyway, Lucy heads over to visit Rook and finds Reggie, grandfather, Matthew, and Miss there too. It's basically the whole council.
Yeah, and could we just before we get into the contents of this like conversation, Rook's like rooftop is just so fucking metal. Like she's just everything's made out of cages. She's got like masks just hanging around from the roof, which is obviously great for Miss, and is probably
Yeah.
largely there for Miss. But it's just such a fucking aesthetic.
Yeah, it's pretty great, isn't it?
Um, yeah, I mean, I loved it, and seeing Reggie again was a bit like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about Reggie a little bit. Like he's interesting. Like as sort of comes up here, the void that he's filling is no longer relevant, and so I'm super
Yeah.
interested to see what the story is going to say. Like, what do you do with someone like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? What an interesting character.
Like, it seems like a sort of early, smaller use case for, like, something like the Undercity. Like, if we fix Kennet or whatever, like, what do you do with something like the Undercity? Like, Reggie's almost gonna be one of our early people who comes up as, like, what do we do with somebody who was created by the universe for something that is no longer relevant? Um
Mm.
yeah, like, yeah, when a tragedy creates another, what do you do when that tragedy is gone and no longer powering them? Yeah, and obviously Rook is actively helping him step in the direction of being an Oni, which is going to be a really cool exploration of the idea of like what a self is. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's really interesting that the people we have here, apart from Rook, are like the remnants of the council, right? Reggie is the hungry choir. Grandfather is obviously the kind of evolution of John. We got Matthew, we got Miss. Apart from the goblins and I suppose the Fae, who have completely faded, this is
Hey,
the remnants of the council, and it's really like grim, I suppose.
yeah, I think that seeing that comparison side by side, like thinking about this versus the council who helped awaken the Kenneteers, you can really feel how through the ringer this town has been.
Yep.
Like Matthew, Sans, Edith, Miss is like the only one who seems like she's in the same spot, but Rook's going to enlighten us on that front in a
Mm,
little bit. Um,
yes.
yeah, it's all and yeah, I mean, even Lucy, like, Lucy is the sole Kenneteer, like, something that comes up here is Lucy's effectively the only Kennet witch at this point, like, Verona is all but migrated to the Undercity, Avery's over in Thunder Bay, like, even on the Kenneteer side, they're, broken down a bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's rough.
Um, Something else as well, like, you sort of mentioned Reggie, here as a kind of Hungry Choir, stand-in, and, I wanted to call out, much like the Hungry Choir, do you get the vibe that, like, Reggie is just kind of Rook's, like, manservant? I don't know, like, just
Mm.
all this jumped out to me because, like, I think it's been the same in his last few appearances. We only ever sort of really see him around Rook, and she just kind of orders him around. And I don't. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but like like it reminds me of how Abraham treats Raquel in the next chapter. Like she's maybe a little bit more polite than he is,
Mm.
but there's just something about the way Rook treats Reggie that doesn't sit quite right with me, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah. No, I definitely have that vibe too. I wonder what there is for Reggie to do outside of assisting Rook, though, right? Like, is he able to just be out and about, or is he kind of confined to hanging out with Rook just because, I'm sure he's not too strong at the moment, like, kind of all that jazz?
Yeah, like I'm wondering if it's some like weird, like shitty Mr. Miyagi thing where since she's like helping move him in the direction of possibly being an Oni, this is like his apprenticeship. Because I guess we've seen like a lot of Oni stuff where like as much as the Oni stand against the system, I feel like sometimes they do in trying to be the exact opposite, kind of fall back into it, and maybe it feels kind of right that
Find their way back to it. Yeah.
yeah, like here, she's just kind of accidentally turned his apprenticeship into the same kind of toxic bullshit that practitioners can kind of end up with.
Well, she's not trying to marry him off, so it's not as bad, I don't think. But
We don't know, but maybe she is.
well, true. Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the
Probably not though.
negotiation that
But
Bridge has done is getting married to Reggie.
I feel like the one thing we can be quite confident in is that Rook is very sternly like on team. Like everyone should have their individual rights and freedoms. I don't think she's going to
Yes,
be
true.
marrying people off.
Um,
Uh, so I guess just to quickly touch on Matthew because he has been a bit of a focus in this arc, but we don't see him much in this one. I do just want to say that Matthew quotes that he's like eating out more than he should, and I just like to claim a quick gainsay on that one because I actually think Matthew is not eating out as much as he should because he shouldn't be in the house at all.
yeah, he should be eating out 100% of the time.
Hmm. If he's had any meal in the house, then he is not eating out as much as he should.
So yeah, the conversation turns to Verona and how she's doing, and as we suspected, it sounds like she's doing pretty well as a practitioner in the Undercity, but not so well as a human.
Yeah, I mean, she's actively kind of leaving that side of her behind. It is nice to hear that she's really killing it in the Undercity, perhaps concerningly, perhaps like in a literal sense, maybe. I don't know. Like, it definitely, I assume that she's committed some acts that Lucy would not be thrilled about, but she's doing well.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to follow this up when we get to the part where we actually see Verona in this chapter. But just like as a teaser for that, she doesn't feel like how do I describe it? She feels like it. there's a very weird vibe in this chapter of her feeling like a side character. Like she doesn't feel like she's one of the three main characters. You know, she feels like she's on the same level as like Matthew or something, like a core character, but not somebody that we, you know, not somebody that we're in the brain of.
Yeah.
And it's only been like 2 chapters since we were in her head, so it's pretty funny to me that that's so clearly coming across.
Yeah, yeah, that's just how it is for Lucy now. Like, she and Lucy are so distanced from each other.
Yeah. I also love the idea of Matthew as like a reflection for Verona, like somebody who has a terrible home situation without any easy answers and is just kind of avoiding the problem. Matthew's starting to be set up as the person that's going to be bumping into Verona a lot because he's also going into the Undercity a lot. And I like their team up as a way for them to realize that they're both doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, except that Matthew mentions she's also avoiding him. So it's like, yeah, I hope that could kind of be a cool way to explore her stuff. But also, the fact that Matthew is in a bad home situation with somebody kind of draining all the joy out of the house might be a huge part of the reason that Verona is avoiding him, because she doesn't want to have to think about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, true.
Oh,
too too fresh of a memory for her.
this is the thing about Verona right now is like she's simultaneously doing the coolest shit in terms of self exploration that we've seen her do, while also doing the worst stuff at the same time. And like this is exactly what she's upset about is people policing her like this. But like, oh, it's just so concerning.
Yep, definitely. Um, so yeah, the conversation next turns to Charles and what they should do next, or what they're not gonna do, really.
Yeah, I love how the story has kind of moved on from like at the start of the story, it was like, okay, how did these villains kill a near omniscient like violence incarnation power thing? And we sort of started to understand that, and then they've taken the role, and so now the story has kind of morphed into, okay, how do we kill a near omniscient power incarnation of violence thing? Like that's such
Yeah,
a fun thing. We established how the Carmine works when it was the victim, and now we've pivoted to it being the bad guy. And we always have to pull from Charles and Maricica's playbook in order to try and defeat Charles and Maricica. It's such a fun idea.
yeah. It is very fun. Now that we know how they did it, can we reproduce what they did, but for our own purposes? Like, I think that's
What and
delightful.
against them? What like surely you
Yeah,
can't just use their playbook against them. Like they're gonna see it coming.
yeah. But yeah, like they don't really. The thing that is hard for Lucy Grok here is there's no moves to make right now, right? Like Lucy says, "Is there a plan?" Rook says yes, and that's as far as they get, basically. I don't know, like yeah, I guess it's grim, but also as Miss will explain, the real point is let's rest, let's recover, let's relax, so that we can take the fight when we have the next opportunity, which isn't going to be immediately after they've just won.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, yeah, the thing that comes up here is because Charles can listen, they have to talk around their plans, and obviously, we're going to learn later that the Kennetys are going to maybe be able to do some stuff in dreams, which they're pretty sure is safe. But even if they can sort of make their plans in the dreams with them so spread out and stuff like that, now at the end of the day, their plans coming to fruition is going to have to involve them being able to work together and trust each other, like
Mm,
Avery says, and like communicate or communicate with body language and stuff. Like it's, I mean, that's kind of how Marisica did it, right? Marisica would just put pawns in place and be able to trust them, and the Kenneteers are going to need to be able to do that with each other. Um, like
interesting. Yeah.
cooperation has been core to this story since the beginning, and I love that now we have to fight this enemy who fighting them will kind of rely on their ability to communicate without like words and just needing to trust each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. They need to build up their ability to just kind of yeah, yeah. They just don't at the moment, right? And I think this conversation does leave a strong impression on Lucy, as we will see um,
Yeah.
towards the end of this chapter with her interactions with Verona. And I guess
Well,
in the
yeah,
dream sequence. So we'll get to that.
yeah, because essentially the reason they lost against Marisica at the end of Arc 13 was because she'd put them in a point where they couldn't work as well together instinctively. they were having to sort of over communicate everything, and now they need to overcome that to like a whole new level in order to have any chance of even fighting Charles. And I mean, this
Yeah.
also ties into Muss's plan that we're going to get to talk about a lot next chapter, which is obviously dealing with a bunch of people who need to trust each other and cooperate. Well, yeah, cooperation. It's everywhere, and I love it.
Yeah. So Mr. Parts, Rook and grandfather are still here, and Lucy takes this opportunity to express her dissatisfaction with the lack of any real plan of attack against Charles.
Yeah.
Um, this explanation that Rook gives on how Miss kind of did everything that she could and still suffered such a troubling loss, I think is really great. Like, I really get the sense that Rook is actually quite unhappy with Lucy for how inconsiderate of Miss she is being here. And I get the sense that there's one moment where Rook like stands up and like starts to circle around, but then comes back and talks to Lucy again. And I get the sense that if grandfather wasn't here, Rook might have actually just kind of gone off a bit at Lucy there.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been the same, but definitely, I agree that the standing up was Rook just kind of like needing to vent a little bit.
Yep.
Like, there's a moment that we skipped over earlier in the chapter where Lucy mentions like how shitty the whole like father with a shotgun for their daughters is because it implies like ownership and that women can't protect themselves. And Wallace, as she mentions that, has that moment of like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Like, you're always pointing out these things that I don't notice. And like this is the part of that where Lucy is on the other side. Like, I think Lucy always needs these, I don't know what word to use, like non-human normative stuff pointed out to her. Like some of the stuff with Verona I would put in this category too. Just like, the less like traditional sort of human behavior or whatever you want to call it. Lucy gets all the social justice stuff very easily, but with things like, Miss not having normal human
Mm.
responses, or Verona wanting to buck the trend, she's on the other side and she sort of needs people to point it out to her because she doesn't get it as instinctively.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting call out. Lucy's you're right, she just doesn't get the other side stuff as much as Verona and even Avery, right? Like the
Yeah,
others that Lucy has been the closest to are probably the most human, right?
yeah,
In John and Gilame, and obviously Gilame's fall away from operating the way that a human would operate has put some tension between him and Lucy that we will see a bit more as well.
yeah. And I mean, this is just a different strokes for different focusing, because we know that Verona is usually on the other side of the social
Yeah.
justice stuff. Like, Verona has said Lucy has had to point that stuff out to her in the past as well, with regards to like racial bias and stuff. So it's just kind of what you've been hit with in life is what you're
Mm.
more attuned to noticing. And for Lucy, that doesn't like include a lot of this stuff. Like, yeah, like this Miss stuff, it's just not the thing that's on her radar. And so, yeah, I guess to go back to what you said about Rook, I do get the vibe that like Rook is frustrated. I don't know that she really hates Lucy for it, but I do think Rook has that moment where she's like, "Oh, you're just like a little bit too human," and
Yeah.
I think that's her moment of just being like, I don't hate you, but like, you don't
Open your
see what you
mind a
don't
bit.
see, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
annoying. Yeah,
Yeah. I think it's worth noting here as well in this interaction how great grandfather is, right? Like, grandfather is just wonderful. He's obviously not a replacement for John, but you can kind of feel his similar outlook and personality, and even like he even seems to go further than John on things like how much innocent children seem to just be getting hurt as part of this town. Like a
yeah.
few things like that that are just so endearing about him.
Yeah, I like honestly calling him young John feels right. He's definitely still rough around the edges, but yeah, I agree. He's turning into someone who could be comparable to John is what it feels like.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to keep seeing him grow, I suppose. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, oh, sorry.
so
Before we move on, I did just want to
mm,
also say, like with the Miss stuff, obviously I was just sort of talking about how Lucy didn't like clock it immediately or anything. It's worth pointing out. I don't think I'd ever really considered this to anywhere near this level of depth either. It was definitely a description where I was sort of like, oh, yeah, that's a really good point, Rook. Like, I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of kind of evaluating an other, right? Is like, what is their core competency? What's the verb that they use to interact with the world?
Yeah, like she mentions that her own one is kind of getting other people.
Mm.
And yeah, she seems good at it because she framed all this myth stuff in a way where I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. That makes a lot of sense.
She
Uh,
explained it in a way
a-
that a human could understand.
and lapsed classicist brings up a great point in the chat as well, which talking about how this all feeds into a bit like Miss has been a bit of a parental figure for the Kenneteers in terms of the practice, and this feels like one of those steps in learning that your parents aren't like these perfect beings. Like this is just sort of as Lucy's growing, she's sort of seeing Miss as a more human person with flaws.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I love that call out. Um, so yeah, Rook delivers the real lesson that she's trying to get across to Lucy here, which is take a breath. Like, we're not about to attack Charles again tonight or tomorrow. Take a beat, relax, recover, because there's going to be a fight and you need to be ready for it.
thank God, thank God, Rook is talking to Lucy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, Lucy really needed to hear this, right? Like, because obviously,
Yeah.
like, it was a very traumatic event that she's just been through, and she's still very tightly wound, and it feels like she's still in adrenaline mode, right? Like fight or flight mode, and that's great, but she's just gonna crash if she doesn't have the chance to relax. So she just kind of needs to take it.
Yeah, it's a really cool next step from like her character journey between arcs 7 and 13 really was Lucy, learning when she wants to bring her knives and when she wants to try and be the smoke.
Mm, mm.
And this is a cool extension of that, which is like learning that sometimes you kind of need to be neither. You need to be sitting there sharpening your knives and I don't know, sharpening your smoke or whatever. But like sometimes you need to sit
Yeah,
there and just
sharpening
be
your
ready
smoke.
to
Yeah.
fight when the time is right. And I mean, obviously, this has to come from Rook because this is really all about like timing and positioning are kind of interrelated. So, of course, Rook is the one who kind of gets it through to Lucy that just because we're not fighting now, it doesn't mean we're not fighting. It's your job to make sure you can fight as well as you can later.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Um, and I think that really helps sell it to Lucy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it makes sense, and this is like great because I think 14.2, like our other Lucy chapter this arc, that was the one where I think we came out of it and we're like, holy shit, like I'm scared for Lucy. She's on the verge of just having a complete breakdown, and she's calmed down a bit by this chapter. But she's still obviously carrying a lot. I think they all are, but this is really the sort of moment where it's like, okay, like this is the path forward for you. Like what was missing from 14.2 is it was like I don't see where Lucy goes from here without like doing something crazy. And this is 14.6 saying, okay, like Lucy, you do need to process it because it's about getting ready to fight later, and that sort of speaks to her.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, exactly right. So, yeah, Lucy prepares to depart, and as she is leaving, she finds grandfather has left some cathartic gifts for her.
Yeah. I mean, this really helps settle this chapter into the like, oh, this is the Lucy chapter in this arc where we're really beginning the healing process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. That's definitely the vibe, but I do like that vibe kind of extends out to the other Kenneteers at the end of this chapter as well. Like it's Lucy is starting to heal, but that is kind of like a signifier of them starting to move on from the trauma of summer break a bit more actively.
Yeah, I think it applies to like all three of them had. I think their first chapter kind of established the territory they were in, like the Undercity, Thunder Bay, and like the shitty new version of Kennet.
Mm.
As well as like the individual Kenneteer where they were doing, and then all of their second one kind of introduced their own footing and their own issues they're going to be dealing with within those territories. So like with Avery, it was her, all her new friends and how she's going to balance like someone toxic like Janine against Nora, I think it was,
Hmm.
and then Verona obviously sort of doubled down on just wanting to be a badass in the Undercity, and now Lucy is kind of going from somebody who was just sitting in the scarred up remains of her hometown where she'd lost a fight,
Mm.
and is now somebody who's like taking these first steps to like not moving on, but like getting out of the hole that she was in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it felt like she was so on edge, and finally she's like, "Well, this metaphor maybe makes it sound a bit more horrible, but she's finally like stepped off the edge and back from the
Yeah.
edge, let's say." But like, it definitely feels like it's all been so built up inside her, and now the dam has burst, and yes, that is causing short-term pain, but that pain is a signifier of being able to move past it. You know, like God, the guitar. Oh, the guitar! What a moment!
And it just, yeah, it plays so well into Lucy's love of music, and it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
perfect. I mean, but like to sort of launch off your point, like I think if this guitar had been given to Lucy by grandfather in 14.2, I think she would have like exploded, just from like
yeah.
emotional overload. So this is sort of our sign that in these, I think it's like a few weeks, honestly, between 14.2 and 14.6, and Lucy sort of recovered to the point where yeah, she can get this, and it hurts, but she's still able to use it to move forward.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And move forward she does. Move forward into being the cop. She's rounding up some troubled youths who have snaked their way up from the underside, and she's basically attempting to support Verona from the sidelines here.
Yeah, I mean, this scene just invokes like the Law and Order fucking classic. Like she finds the perps and they run off, and then she like goes to the
Yeah.
victim and it's like, "Do you want me to help you or save them?" Like she just points and fucking enters action mode, and she's avoiding traps. It was great. I loved the vibe of this scene. It's just going into the cop procedural sort of chase scene.
Yeah, because it's not like upbeat in any way, but it's like it's moving quick. It's getting you into like, okay, now we're back in the thick of things, but in a way where like we're not just obsessing over the summer break night and dealing with the scars of that. We're kind of like moving on, right? It's very like back in the action, but in a way that feels a bit more, I don't know, healthy
Yeah.
or progressive.
Well, this is Lucy getting to do work to stop Kennett going into decline, which is, I mean, we know Lucy doesn't like to like sit on her ass while things are going bad, but
Yeah.
Verona was kind of pushing her away from the Undercity and stuff. So like, this is her first real opportunity to just sort of be productive, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is what she kind of needs. But I think this is like a really important moment to talk about because obviously we've already made a bunch of like police jokes, and obviously like Lucy's relationship
Yeah.
with the police and just like the whole metaphor of the Kenneteers as town police has been something the story's talked about a lot. And as we already mentioned, Lucy is now like the only sheriff in these parts. And so, in a way, this is our first example of okay, what does it look like if Lucy is the one policing this town? And I'd be very curious if she looked at it through this lens, whether she thinks that how she handled this lives up to her expectations for herself, because she like chases this guy down, kind of waterboards him for a bit, then like kind of gets compliance through the threat of throwing him deeper into the water because she knows he can't swim. It's not. I don't know. It's hard because they're under city people, so this is kind of what they respond to, like
Yeah,
textually.
this is the
So
language they speak, definitely.
yeah, so I can't fault her too much, but I don't feel like this is how Lucy would have pictured herself doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I do think the fact that this is explicitly what the undersiders respond to is maybe what makes it okay. Because, like,
Yeah,
that's just they don't respond to Lucy and what she's asking until she does this. And I don't know, maybe that's again indicative of a problem, but who knows?
yeah, well, yeah. The fact that these are undecideds is really the only reason I haven't just landed on she shouldn't have done this, because this is how they respond to stuff. Yeah, I guess it comes down to measurement. Like she isn't really necessarily overly cruel in this. Like the second she kind of has them in the spot where they will comply, she's very kind. I think really. So
Yeah, definitely. And
yeah,
she treats him with a lot of respect, like stern but very fair is the vibe.
yeah, which is kind of the vibe you need for like the undersiders, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. The thing that I found interesting about this is like we kind of explicitly call out Lucy talking about how she's got to support Verona from the sidelines, and that stood out to me as like that's Avery's whole thing, right? And marrying that with the fact that Verona has been doing a lot of connection building stuff and like making friends basically, and building a place for her and the other Kenneteers, it really stuck out to me as like, oh, Verona and Lucy are like having to step up and take over some of the things that would have totally been Avery's domain if she was still around. And I think that's funny. Like, not just that, but like without Avery, their dynamic has felt different. And like, you
Mm.
really feel Avery's absence in such a tangible way in the Verona and Lucy chapters. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, what was that quote from? I think it was 14:5, where Lucy sort of said, "It feels like we've forgotten to do some stuff that came naturally before we had Avery."
Yeah.
Um, like Avery was kind of insecure about her place as a bit of a third wheel early in this story, and I think Lucy and Verona now have very tangible evidence that she's very much a part of the trio.
Yeah, 100%. Avery is the third wheel in that she adds stability to the tricycle. Um,
Yeah,
And
yeah,
without her,
bicycles tip over.
a two-wheeled tricycle would fall over pretty quickly.
But I mean, that said, like, obviously, Avery is in Thunder Bay having to, lean into her more Veronary parts to try and like figure out all the politics of the practice and all that. Like, it's all of them have been kind of isolated in a way, and so all of them kind of need to cover all of the bases a little bit. And I mean, this is
Yeah, yeah,
like this comes back to a lot of the stuff with like pulling the best parts of your friends, like their ability to sort of say, oh, what would Avery do, and that sort of thing is part of why they're better at all these other things as people than they would have been without that person.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a marker of their growth that they're able to even somewhat do this, right?
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that's going to be important if we are going to try and formulate plans and work together and need to trust each other and not communicate because Charles can hear everything outside the dreams. Like,
Hmm.
if Avery comes up with a plan for something in Kennet, but she can't be there to execute it, like the others need to be competent enough to sort of fill in for Avery and vice versa.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Lucy manages to subdue some of this gang and then rounds up the rest. And when they find out who she is, they give up pretty quickly.
So good. Verona's so fucking terrifying.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Like, yeah, she's really doing it. She's really. We talked about how she pretty clearly got that they needed to make a name for themselves as the Kenneteers in the underside, so that they would get the respect and the ability to operate as the protectors and kind of guardians and peacekeepers of Kennet. And it's been like a week, and Verona's already basically done it. Like she's kicking ass.
Yeah, I think she ended 14.5 with being like angry that she's not being taken seriously. And sounds like she has addressed that problem pretty comprehensively in the Undercity.
Yep. So yeah, Lucy hands off these troublemakers to Verona, who takes them and brings them to under justice to face detention at the school.
I continue to just fucking love the aesthetic of the Undercity. Like, from a writing sort of standpoint, us just learning that they're getting level 4 detention is such a fun way to like let our imaginations run wild about what the levels of detention involve.
Yeah. What do you think is the highest level detention, and what does that entail?
I got the impression that 5 might be the highest, but it's only the highest we hear about. Who knows? This seems like the sort of place where if a higher level was warranted, they might just spin it up.
Yeah, totally. You'd make up worse and worse punishments. I'm sure they would enjoy doing that at the school.
Yeah, just the idea that like, yeah, level 4 detention is the serious punishment. It's so cool. I love this place so much.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a short interaction with Verona here though, and the strain is pretty real. But on the positive side, like these troublemakers immediately respect Verona and just completely follow what she says and accept the punishment. Like she's clearly doing good stuff there, but you can feel the human cost at play in the interaction with Lucy.
Yeah. But what's really funny, like what something that jumped out to me as weird on my first read is like Lucy calls Verona and Verona appears and she's like really skittish and almost comes across as like a nervous animal is how Lucy describes her.
Mm.
And I didn't really get this on my first read, but sort of knowing having the more complete picture and reading on my second read, one thing that also jumped out to me was that Verona doesn't stop being like that when Lucy sees her and like waves her over. It's not really until they start talking that Verona enters like badass Verona mode. And I realized the thing that like Verona is skittish about and nervous about is Lucy. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure. Like she's walking around this undercity being like a massive badass, and then Lucy comes down here and calls her over, and Verona is suddenly freaking the fuck out.
Yeah.
Because it feels like her walking around being skittish is the exact opposite of the whole vibe she's trying to cultivate down here.
Yeah, and like, Lucy waves to her and Verona doesn't wave back.
Yep.
Verona's first words to Lucy are, "What did you bring me?" Like, there's no
Yeah.
pleasantry, there's nothing. Like, it's pretty, I don't know. You feel it. It's grim.
Yeah, I mean, like you can tell Verona is terrified that Lucy has come down here to confront her or to nag her about
To
something or whatever,
make her
however you
come
want to phrase
home
it.
and be a
Y-
human.
Yeah, exactly. And like it's yeah, just kind of a little bit heartbreaking that this fucking badass who kind of owns the Undercity at this point hears her best friend call for her and is just terrified and skittish. Yeah, I mean, we should call out Lucy. I would say Lucy's result here is a mixed success in terms of not like nagging or pushing Verona. Like I think she overall does a pretty good job, but there's just this moment where she quickly fits in. Hey, do make sure you talk to Jeremy, and we have a test tomorrow. You should show up for the test. Like it's yeah, I don't know. She is really trying not to push Verona, but she definitely notices this is going to be a very quick conversation and just has to sneak a few
Yeah, has to get
little
a few in
prods in
there.
there.
I mean, but the thing is, Lucy's right. These are, I mean, I don't necessarily think the test is that important, but there is a lot of important stuff going on here that, as far as she knows, Verona is just ignoring. So
It,
I kind of
yeah,
agree with Lucy that she needs to do something, but she doesn't know what to do, and neither do I.
yeah, like the Jeremy prompt feels extremely warranted given what we saw earlier in the chapter. But this comes back to the whole thing we're talking about earlier, where like Lucy is in a position where she can't be that one to push because Verona will push back harder given their recent history. Yeah, what a mess.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so next Lucy goes to visit Alpi, who is staying in Guillemet's cave. She has a short and very painfully awkward interaction with Guillemet here.
Yeah, like his situation is about as bad as I might have possibly like thought it could be. This dude is clearly fucking depressed. He's just like squatting in his cave. Definitely hasn't found his momentum as a winter fairy yet. He's just sort of still mourning himself, I guess.
Yeah. Um, and so, you know, two times in this conversation, Guillermet offers to give lessons in something to Lucy, but lessons in a way that, like, you learn so much that you end up not caring about what you were trying to learn anymore, which is just like the perversion of his role as the mentor, I suppose. Like the mentor who can teach you so much that it will actually be a negative how much he has taught you, which is grim.
Yeah, and like because we've talked so much about how the like final moments sort of help form who the like who you become as a winter fairy, and I wouldn't have thought that that summarized who Guillermet had been in the story till now. Like I think Lucy still really appreciates everything she's learnt in terms of combat. Avery was still liking the check marks. I guess we don't know how he ended up with his like lover guy who was the reason he exiled himself to Kennet, but it's a really grim outlook because I wouldn't have seen that focus being such an intense part of like winterized Guillermet.
The focus on like mentorship.
No, or the focus on this kind of cursed mentorship, like the
I see,
cursed part.
right.
Like the
The
mentorship
cursed
definitely.
part of it, yeah, the cursed part of it to me is the bastardization of it that just kind of, I guess, inherently comes as winter. Like, if he was going to teach you about something, he wouldn't know when to stop teaching, right? Like, he's
Right, yeah.
so much a mentor that he will mentor you until, like literally you cannot be mentored any further, and that's many steps too far. That was kind of my read on it.
Yeah, also his fall to winter happening around summer break when he failed maybe sort of set this tone of his students not being able to succeed or something. Because obviously, like Lucy and Avery,
Yeah, interesting.
uh, and Verona all sort of didn't manage to stop it. So maybe that ties into it. I also think there's another aspect which is he is trying to push Lucy away from being one of his students, I think. Like, he's quite open about that a number of times. So there's maybe a part where he is playing up how cursed his students will be because he doesn't want Lucy to be attached to him right now when he's still unsure of his position in Winter.
Maybe he hasn't fallen to Winter at all, and this is a trick to bait Marusika into a false sense of security. He's pretending to have fallen to Winter, and that will allow him to catch out Marcy at some key pivotal moment. I'm still on the Guillermet is going to
Yeah.
defeat Marcy train.
Yeah, optimistic to the point of delusion is maybe how I'd summarize that.
Oh, well, but yeah, no, it's interesting. It's like he's not helpless. You know what I mean? Like he's
Hmm,
not.
hmm. Like, Winter Fairy
He's
aren't like frail robots. They're
yeah,
still people.
but it's very. I just my expectation has been set for it just being continually disappointing in a very tangible way. Like the earlier interactions we had with Guillermet, where it was starting to be, where it was starting to be like that, where he was starting to just kind of have disappointing responses to things. Like that's what it feels like it's going to be, and that's so frustrating. It's like this character who he liked is going to get kind of bastardized and remembered as actually just kind of shitty in the end.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of plays off. I think there's like a real metaphor when it comes to falling to winter for like stuff like retirement or something. It's not. I
Mm,
don't have a super clean picture of it, but it feels like a tie. Like, there are obviously sort of dementia related
yeah,
symptoms
yeah.
as he was falling. Like, there's a tie to sort of old age and getting to that point in your life where you can't do what you used to do.
Mm,
And like, winter as a concept is, the fairy live for telling stories, and winter is basically the point where they can't tell new stories anymore.
yeah,
And so it's going to be so interesting to see where we take him, because we've had people like Grumble in the story, and now Guillermet is also going to enter this from a more other perspective of, yeah, how do we handle somebody who can't do, I guess, or, like, he can do some stuff, but like, he's now so limited, and he can't help in the way he wants. He can't change who he is. How do you help someone like that? What do you do with them? Like, that's going to be such an interesting idea to explore.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, just like I have no idea what to expect from it because he's still like he's not dead. He's still here. It's just a very tragic, slow, sad decline of an ending for him, and it's yeah,
Yeah,
miserable.
it
Unless it's
reminds me
fake.
of
Unless it's fake, and then I will be
yeah,
happy.
sure, yeah. Yeah, it does remind me of like older people I've known in my life, like some of those people who lived for their work, and when they retired, just completely lost any sense of like purpose in the world.
Mm,
Like, yeah, when you're somebody who sort of lived for your career and your job, and you've done it for 40, 50 years, and then you don't have that anymore, some of these people just kind of get de-anchored from life and into depression and stuff, and that just feels like where Guillermet is, and I can't wait to sort of see what the story has to say about how people like that can fit into this world. Um,
yeah,
Especially as he is trying to push Lucy away, and luckily, unlike Verona, this is a person who Lucy can turn around and say, "Nah, fuck off. I'm still going to hang out here
yep,
too."
yeah. But yeah, so Lucy has come to visit Alpi because she wants Alpi to cause a dream reunion, I guess. And that happens. Alpi brings the Kenneteers into a Dreamtime meeting, and they talk.
Yeah. A quick first point. I love that the first order of business is catching up as friends. Like, this is something I feel like we used to talk about with the Kenneteers a lot. Like, it's a classic good Kenneteer trait that before getting down to business, it's all like, oh, Avery has, a girl that she likes, and Verona takes off her mask. Like, they connect as people before they get down to business, and I just like that.
Mm, yeah, yeah, definitely. It is nice. It's the first nice Kenneteer moment we've really had. The first just like, the Kenneteers are back kind of
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, this arc has been defined by the fact that they were not together, and we finally get to see them kind of together again.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I I also just I love that we get to see this like extra level of insights into where the Kenneteers are at. Like, I feel like we're 99% sure this is the end of arc 14 in this episode, right? So I love this as our kind of this is where the Kenneteers are sort of heading into the next phase of the story. Like Verona is still worried about the future, and she's got like Melissa smoking crack behind her in her dream. Avery's being sort of dragged into the mess at Thunder Bay with the water threatening to drown her. Like she's worried about her position in the present, and then Lucy has just this fucking stream of failed father figures behind her. Oh,
Yeah,
failed is maybe an unfair qualifier for
yeah.
her like
Uh,
biological dad, but
Dead father
yeah,
figures, or ex father figures.
yeah. I feel comfortable using failed for everyone except her bio dad.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, okay. I mean, for some, yes. For some, no. I
Like
wouldn't call John a
Paul
failed
absolute.
father figure.
Well, he could have not gone to the
He
fight.
could have not gone in. It's true.
Yeah.
But then we wouldn't
It,
have grandfather, huh?
yeah. I mean, no offense to grandfather, but if I had to pick one.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I don't know. I really like this as our sort of final glimpse at where all three of these guys are as we head into the sort of next phase where it seems arc 14 definitely let us take a step back and enter recovery mode, and arc
Mm,
15 I think they're not better yet. Like there's still a lot of emotional crap to get through as they're going forward, but arc 15 looks like it's about to add some new complications on top of the emotional recovery.
mm, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, just like again, really nice cathartic moment for the trio. It's just, it's a nice heartwarming moment to really start to have us as the audience also kind of heal from the trauma of the night.
Yeah, yeah, and this is why it feels like the end of Fallout, because this is after 6 chapters of them being apart, being traumatized, they're sort of coming back and entering that spot where they can say, "Okay, how do we start getting ready?" Like, the theme of this
Mm,
chapter is Lucy realizing she needs to start getting ready for when they can fight, and that's sort of her starting that road here.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they're presumably on the road to trying to become a team again, and I can't wait to see where this goes because I don't think part of me just wants them to get back to where they were like earlier in the story, but just as like better practitioners, where they're like the three of them are just this inseparable trio who, when they're together, are completely unstoppable.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're going to get that. I think, they're going to stay a bit apart and they're never going to quite be these three people who bunk in the same room at the BHI and just are incredibly capable and inseparable. They're going to be three individuals who
Yeah.
can maybe trust each other and, get to this level where they can, kind of trust each other and understand where they are, but it won't be these three people who just are like attached at the hip, which is sort of what they were early on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they're not going to be as, yeah. I mean, Goldfish Bowl puts it in chat very
Yeah.
eloquently, which is just to say that's how growing up goes, right? Like
Yeah.
this is a coming of age story type of deal. Like the allegory there is definitely very real.
Yeah, and it's gonna be really interesting for all 3 of them because obviously, like, we know Avery loves her relationships where 2 people are, like, inseparable. So it's gonna be a bit of a thing for her learning that friendships moving in this different direction and becoming less intense doesn't necessarily mean that they're worse. And then Lucy and Verona have been essentially attached at the hip since preschool. So them finding a new groove is going to be a very big deal because for most of their lives, all they've really had is each other.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and like Verona gives off the impression, from Lucy's perspective, that she doesn't really care about that right now, but she does just in her own way, and it's going to hurt her if she starts to realize that like her and Lucy are going to have to move apart.
Mm, yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, but that's where we kind of round out the chapter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I just had 2 questions from this last bit I
Mm,
wanted to ask, like, you and the chat.
yeah.
One of the first ones is in Avery's dream behind her, there's, like, a figure who sort of reaches forward to help grab her, and it has a fish hook inserted through the corner of its mouth.
Mm.
Do we know, like, who is that? I don't remember that being an aesthetic of anyone on the council that we've met.
Uh, I mean, so this is in Avery's mind. So the thing that she's afraid of, right, is somebody
Yeah.
having their hooks in her, so to speak. My gut feel is that that's Florin, right? Like, Florin is starting to worm his way into Avery's mind. She's possibly worried that he's starting to, like, have some sway over her, either through his practice or just as a, an air quotes ally, right? That's my gut feel.
Yeah, sorry, I am seeing in the chat. I misread it. The fish hook is in Avery's mouth, not
Yeah.
the person's. Okay, but well,
Oh,
yeah, still,
sorry. Yeah.
okay, then yeah, no, I agree. Florin is probably the one who feels like he's most got his hooks in her. We'll see, I guess, but yeah. Okay, the
Mm.
next question then, and maybe this should just be our discussion question next week. I'm bummed that this isn't the week for a new discussion question because Lucy sort of ends this chapter on saying we need to remove the current holder of the throne and find another person to take it. And I'd be very interested to hear who you and the chat think would be good candidates for like replacing Charles.
I mean, there's a pretty obvious answer, right? Because John was going to go for it the first time. So who better to take the throne than John 2.0? Better John, let's call him. The man himself, grandfather.
I mean, grandfather doesn't feel anywhere near ready enough for that,
No,
does
he
he? Like,
doesn't, does he? And he would know. He would nowhere near. He would definitely not want to do it. Correctly, he wouldn't want to do it.
yeah, but like, I don't know. I found this interesting because no candidate jumps out to me as like half decent. Like everyone who might have been good, died trying to get in there last time. Like yeah,
Yeah.
like this ending to this arc essentially is really establishing that yes, Charles is the bad guy that we're going to be trying to fight and overthrow for the next chunk of the story. But this is still the big mystery to me is we need someone to replace him, and I can't think of anyone who's remotely suited to it.
Um, Here's a left field answer for you, Elliot. Abraham Musser. Now, let me explain.
Yeah, okay.
So, we know Musser is pretty keen for some form of power, right? Like he probably wouldn't. He didn't want the throne himself. He sent Reed for it, but he clearly is aware of the throne as a political kind of leveragey position. And so I think he could, if he was down, if he gets beaten down enough, I think he could be convinced to take it. And because he set up these other lordships, it would inherently remove a lot of the power that position would have as well. So I think it would be karmically very wonderful for him to be the person that is put on the throne and not be as powerful as he wants to be, and therefore be more manageable because of his own machinations. I just think that would be a funny evolution of his story, I suppose.
Yeah, I just think he's smart enough to not do
To
it,
not do
or
it
like
himself, yeah. To send
he'll
Raquel
know it's a
more,
step down. He'll need to be
yeah.
desperate to do it. Somebody
Mm.
suggested the vice principal from the Undercity, and I don't know about her specifically, but I think actually the idea of pulling from the Undercity has a lot of merit. Yeah, I that's where I'd be hunting for a candidate. Actually, is the Undercity.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Maybe the Bitter Street Witch will be the new candidate.
Yeah, obviously Verona must have met her at this point, so I can't
You would
wait to
think,
meet
yeah.
the bittersweet witch, the bittersweet witch.
The Bittersweet Witch, yeah.
Um, I mean, well, that's the joke. Anyway, yeah, like I can't wait to meet her now that Verona already has, because we're going to get to jump into that relationship as it's already formed, and that'll be a fun difference compared to
Do you
like watching
think?
Verona meet the vice
Yeah,
principal.
yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'd be. I guess I'd be surprised if we don't see the first meeting with the Bitter Street Witch, but we'll see. We'll see. Um,
I think well, it could be Lucy's, like if Lucy has to meet
yeah,
her with
true.
Verona for some reason or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
Carmine
yeah,
freak squeak.
the Carmine Freak squeak is good. Um, so let's get on to 14Z, shall we? Our interlude ending this arc, probably. Even though we haven't got up to 1412 yet, which is strange. We know that's coming up
Yeah.
soon,
Oh,
presumably.
yeah, good point.
um, but yeah, we're with Basil. We're in Basil's mind. He's an ex-student of the BHI, and he has been summoned back by Musa.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot to talk about with Basil, but I love how this is used like right from the start. We kind of get to get a bit of a glimpse at what someone like Basil would consider the Blue Heron's golden years, like before
Mm.
basically the realization that giving your textbooks out means that people can compete with you made everyone like stop being chill. Especially because like we're about to enter Moss's grand plan for everyone to work together to share power. And it's like, oh yeah, like the Blue Heron, where everyone got along great at the start, and then they realized they have to share shit, so they started fighting. Like, what a great anecdote to lead into Moss's brilliant new plan.
Yeah, the thing I love about that is on second read, my response to that is like, oh yeah, but you know, Basil, like the evolution of that was Ray's like making the Ethereum, what is it, the Athenium arrangement,
Yeah,
so that information is more open to everybody, and you know, like that's pretty good. So surely that's like a system that you can abide. And then obviously, we'll find this out later about Basil. Athenium arrangement. That's right. Sorry, we'll find this out later about Basil. He is despite thinking that that's a good way for things to go, he's not above just kind of fucking those systems over for his own gain. So it's a real tragedy of the commons thing where like Basil is, you know, uh, bemoaning the fact that these better systems don't exist, but fully willing to be a part of the problem that is meaning that
yeah,
they
yeah.
also can't exist, which I just think is like classic practitioner hypocrisy that Basil embodies so well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like, he's this guy fucking sitting here going, "Oh, it was better when we had like XYZ." But you know, is he sharing his stuff? Like, is he helping bring back those times? I doubt it.
Yeah, no, and almost certainly he is a contributor to the fact that things are more restricted now because
Yeah,
otherwise you get people like him.
yeah, yeah. Great point. Great point.
Uh, um, but yeah, like I mean, we should talk about that because like I think Wabo very intentionally wants you to like Basil, right? Like
Yeah,
Basil, there are a number of times where Basil echoes sentiments that we as the audience are having, and like Basil is put in situations that we'll get to later, like the whole situation with Musa and Raquel, and like does about as well as we could expect a practitioner to do, while not
yeah.
like not being a piece of shit. Um,
And without like sabotaging his position, like without just sort of openly being hostile and sort of
yes,
cutting ties. Yeah.
yes. And you know, we learn like the thing that he has asked for in exchange for coming is to have an apology delivered to Ray, and you're like, oh, he's like he's a good
Mm.
practitioner, and I just love that as because that gets so eroded by the end of the chapter. I think it's just wonderful.
Yeah, this chapter is basically an exercise in learning that Basil is a super unreliable narrator, and
Hmm.
doesn't have a realistic picture of who he is.
Yeah.
But you're right, like really sort of at the start here, you kind of built up to think of him as like a pretty great guy. Like he definitely how he thinks of himself. Like he's just reminiscing about Blue Heron and when it was better because everyone shared and that sort of leads you to think, oh, you know, he's a good guy. He wants the good things about the Blue Heron Institute to be more prominent. Like, you like that.
Yeah, the thing that made it funny to me was later on, Musa explicitly says to him like, "I think you're a decent person," and on first read you might be like, "Oh, you know, even Musa thinks he's a decent person. That must be good." But on second read, I was like, "Oh yeah, Musa
It's
thinks he's
Mossa.
a decent person. That's not a good sign."
Yeah, exactly. I was sort of like, even the first read, I was like, oh, it's not great coming from Mussa, but like, I suppose. And then on the second read, it's very explicitly like, oh no, he's just a small Mussa.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the chapter, Mussa sort of reiterates this statement, but in that time, he phrases it as like, "You remind me of myself when I was younger," which is a fucking indictment and a half.
Yeah, and Basil even thinks to himself that he's taking some steps that make him more like Musa. Which, if
Yeah, yeah.
that's not a warning sign, Basil, come on.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we sort of get to the end of that segment because it's fun to dive into.
Yeah,
But to go into like his reminiscing on the golden days of the Blue Heron here, one of the things he notes is that like a huge benefit he got is he got this well-rounded education from teachers that are among the best in the field in the world, and he lists like Raymond and Durocher, which were like, oh well,
yeah.
yeah, like we know that they're world tier. But he lists a third name there, which is Louisa Crow, and that jumped out to me because I had not had in my head a picture of Louisa as being on the
Yeah.
level that would warrant her making a list next to Ray and Marie. Like, what?
Yeah, over Alexander and Bristow and
Yeah.
and
Well, we
Massa.
always knew they were like local powers. Like Raymond and Marie
Mm.
have always been the ones who are like they're world class. Like, do we know what the Crows do? Like, what is Louisa doing that she's apparently on par with those two?
Yeah, we don't really know, other than
Yeah.
the fact that she is smart enough to get out of the practice clearly sets her apart a pretty high
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah, we know that they're sort of a little bit more morally stomachable than Alexander and Bristow, and Massa, but I mean that goes without saying. But yeah, I had not realized like it's funny, Louisa checked out of the Blue Heron thing, and that just kind of meant that all the rest of them have not treated her with the same reverence that Ray and Durachet kind of get.
Mm, yeah, yeah, it's true. Maybe the fact that she stepped away puts her like just kind of devalues her in the minds of the Bristows and the Alexanders.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And and this whole thing just sort of got me thinking. You have three top of the world practitioners in the Blue Heron founders list. Like that's super impressive. But like, how much of that is kind of cause and effect from the Blue Heron incident itself? Like
Mm,
like if Ray and Durachet and Louisa were all like promising practitioners, but their cut of the Blue Heron stuff, that's like they're like the people who kind of win the lottery or something, like end up with a $10 million no strings attached investment in their business. Like, of course, your business is going to be extremely successful if you have a massive amount of funds that you don't have to pay someone back for. Like, I don't know. I just find it really interesting to sort of consider the Blue Heron people have so much influence, and how much of that is natural talent versus like luck and the opportunity they
mm.
had.
Yeah, it's a good question. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever get the answer to that question. I mean, we saw them beforehand, right?
Yeah,
And they
well, just
seemed
because
similar.
yeah, I mean, because you see this sort of stuff in real life, right? Like the people who ultimately tend to find this massive success are the people who are talented, yes, but also get that small $2 million loan from their parents when they're
Yeah,
22,
yeah,
right? Like it's the mixture of talent and
and
opportunity,
luck or
and
privilege. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So it's like it doesn't completely discredit their skills, but it also sort of how much does Ray owe the massive amount of success that he hates that he's found to yeah, the Blue Heron incident very specifically.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Um, and like, because something I think Massa talks about here is another thing that I think they kind of got lucky on is how well rounded the whole crew was. Like, Bristow really managed the innocence and like the aware and stuff, and like the witch hunters. Alexander was very good at networking with sort of practitioners. Massa obviously was the money. Ray had all the tech stuff. Like, they were a crew. There were a bunch of different people, and that was their strength as well. And they seem to have mostly kind of found each other on accident in that Blue Heron thing. So, like, just another instance of being in the right place at the right time, elevating you from promising to world class.
yeah, I mean, you get those opportunities, and you can, if you're clever, you can really capitalize on them, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Basil is given a brief tour and update by Massa, who stops to pick up Raquel as they go, and Raquel kind of fetches some snacks for them.
Yeah, regular Reggie. It's funny. I like. There's a lot of sections here where, as Basil's getting the tour, he like is really he kind of reverted going a bit on what it's like to have gone to school here. And I just wanted to call out how much Walbo nailed this. About a year ago, I had to go back to like my school. I went to the same school for primary and high school. And I had to go back there for like a work related thing. And since a lot of the same teachers were there, I ended up like kind of touring around most of the school and catching up with a lot of teachers. And it was so weird because like some things were super different, other things were the same. Your relationship, like I felt out of place there because I'm no longer like a 17-year-old student. Um, I really like connected with how Walbo described Basil's vibe here of like being glad he's back because he really enjoyed his time at school, but also just everything feels weird and different.
Yeah, it's hard for me to place how much of that is the revertigo, as you said, versus how much of a like shell shocked the BHI
Yeah.
is at the moment.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean
I don't
that's
know.
that's true. Like, because my without going into specifics, my school has had some really substantial changes happen to it since I went there that like fundamentally changed the vibe of it. So sort of walking around, it was very much like, oh, the tone of this place is very different to what it was when I went here. In my case, it was for the better. The weirdest part was going back to the primary school part though, and they've shrunk it. Everything's like half as big as it used to be.
Yeah, I'm sure they've shrunk it. That's how it works.
Yeah, like that must have been expensive. Crazy thing to do.
Yeah, it seems to get smaller and smaller every year. Maybe there's some kind of defective shrink ray in one of the science labs. Um, I do like the how seemingly every generation of students at the BHI likes to fuck with the brownies. That reveal from Basil was pretty fun.
It's just very high school student, isn't it? Like, it's the
I mean, it's the
equivalent of
most
being
Harry
able to
Potter shit, and I love it.
yeah, it's just realistic, right? Like, this is the Blue Heron equivalent of torturing the substitute teachers or whatever god awful things we used to do as teenagers that I regret now. Although it's hard to feel too much sympathy for the brownies given who they are and what they've done.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fine. Messing with brownies is probably okay, in
Yeah,
my
I don't know if
opinion.
it help. Like, I don't know if it helps. Like their whole thing is that they're kind of desperate and like going extinct, and that's why they're so belligerent about like claiming people to torture and stuff. So it's like you got to feel that. It reminds me of telemarketers, where I like hate them and hate everything they stand for, but also usually the people calling you from the telemarketers are just people who need money to
Yeah,
survive.
exactly. They're people. They're not the system is flawed and they're cogs within it. They're not necessarily at
Yeah,
fault.
yeah, exactly. And this is where we learn what Basil does as his practice, and it sounds really, really cool. And so, of course, he just uses it to steal shit because why would you do anything actually genuinely interesting and good for society with your ability to capture like sentient words and shit?
Yep. But yeah, Musa reveals that part of the reason he brought Basil here is because he wants Raquel to marry him. Classic.
Oh yeah, let's get
Classic
through this
Musa.
part.
Yeah, I mean, good to
Fucking
see that
hell.
Musa has learned zero lessons from the losses that he suffered in Kennet.
I mean, like what lessons do you want him to learn, Ruben? He's come out of Kennet in a better position than he was when he went there. Like,
Has he? Has he though? His
yeah,
son is dead.
he clearly gives zero shits
Yeah,
about that.
yeah,
A-
it's
And
true.
now he has this. Now he's in this position to have this opportunity to take over most of the state, or province. I think they are in Canada. Like if anything, the lesson that he learned in Kennet was keep doing what you're doing, mate. It's going fantastically.
Mm. Um, but yeah, so like Raquel's gonna go with and live with Basil as a trial match. I mean, like on my second read, I was like, this felt high stakes to me on the first read, but then you know, given what happens at the end of this chapter, it's probably not gonna actually eventuate. So
Oh, I don't know. He can get free of the jockey. Whether Muscle will still be interested in somebody who got taken down that peg, I suppose, is
mm,
arguable.
mm,
Uh,
true.
but yeah, I mean, the sad truth is, I think even knowing who Basil is on the second read through, I was reading this and thinking this does kind of feel like Raquel's one of Raquel's best case scenarios outside of just telling her family to go suck an egg, which is what I still wish she would do. But like, if
Yeah,
she's going to insist on staying in the family and get married off, I think the sad truth is Basil is probably pretty high up the list of people, at least as he is now.
yeah. I had the same basic thought of like, and that's what's so rough about it is I'm sure Musa has had that thought too of like Basil is probably the person that Raquel will be the most likely to say yes to, right? Like that's probably why Musa has picked him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's played it well. Like, one of the things I hate about this is that moment where Muss sort of like, "Oh yeah, I want you to. I thought you might like to rescue Raquel from our family," which is just like he couldn't even let us have the one part, which
Yeah,
is
I
that we're
know.
getting Raquel away from him. That's also part of his plan, and I fucking hate it. It's like such a good example of how these systems like capitalism kind of make it so even the people fighting it serve the people in power in it. Yeah. Uh, there's a bunch of great quotes mixed into this section though that just really highlight how shit this society is. And Massa specifically, I love the part where Basil is like, "Are you sure you'd be okay with Raquel learning the trade of a thief, as opposed to her learning the Musser family trade?"
Yeah, good times.
But yeah, and just like the moment, I guess we already touched on it, but where Basil has this moment where he's like, "Oh shit, I'm such a terrible person. I just forgot I haven't like said sorry about Reed." And honestly, he said that, and I was like, "Oh shit, I forgot about Reed too." And Abraham just sort of is like, "Ah, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, whatevs." I suppose that is affecting Raquel. Like, he can't even be fucked to pretend to be sad about his son dying when he sent him to die. Like, it's just fuck this guy so much.
Yeah, he's pretty horrific, isn't he?
And
Um,
like knowing what we know about Basil now, it really like on the second read, it really reframes like every time Basil brings up Ray and he's like, I just want to apologize to Ray and make things even. And Muscle's like, oh yeah, he's not here, so it's good we can bring you into the fold. Well, it's like we know that Basil tried to fucking steal from this dude, and Muscle doesn't even pretend to be like, you betrayed my friend or whatever. Like he's just such a piece of
yeah,
shit.
he just does not give us a single shit as long as he's getting towards his goals.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Musser and Basil look out over the kids playing, and they almost seem peaceful.
Yeah, it's one of these moments where it's like, Massa says some stuff about like Braxton Hart too, and it's a bit like, it's so weird, Massa, that all these people who, when they're young, have such vibrance and vigor. The more they grow up around you, the more they seem to turn like sour and depressed. And
Yeah,
I guess that's just life, right, Abe?
yeah,
Like
that just happens.
unavoidable.
No, the thing that really stood out to me about this, and none of the practitioners seem to pick up on it, but like every single person that's here, Massa goes through like an intense family tragedy that they have had recently, right? Like there's horrific things happening to every single practitioner family, and they don't seem to think like every single practitioner has all these horrifying things happen to them. Oh well, that's how it goes. Like they
Yeah.
don't they don't question it at all.
Well, I mean, if it is happening to everyone, then yeah, like that's just how it goes. Like, I mean, I can see why you'd fall into that trap of just assuming that's how things are.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd think you'd think you'd be able to notice that and start to question it. And I guess I mean like Basil does question it, right? A little later in the chapter. He does question it and then he kind of puts it out of his mind. So perhaps that's what every practitioner does. Just have a moment of like, "Hey, wait, is this actually fucked up?" No, it's probably fine. And then never kind of get to that
Well,
point that allows them to break out of the mold.
yeah, because the next step is sort of realizing that everything you've built your life around is shit, and that's a big step to take, especially when that's what gives you your power and your livelihood. Like, you can see why that is a blocking point for a lot of these people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I just want to call out, like, jumping back to Raquel a bit. Walbo just dropped a great line in the chat, which is like talking about how a lot of the stuff where Abraham is sort of saying to Basil, like, you will do this, you won't touch her, you can rescue her. It is really his way of like staying on top and being in power in their relationship. Like now, what Massa has done is that even if Basil sort of rescues her, Massa has ownership of that. So, like that is how he's created this no-win scenario for anyone but himself.
Yeah, he's definitely he's a part of the equation regardless, right?
Yeah.
He's inserted himself to be central to that. And yeah, it's pretty messed up.
Yeah, and like this came up in my live read a bit too, because like the thing is, even if you want Raquel and Basil to kind of go through with this because you think it's one of the better scenarios for Raquel to at least keep pretending or whatever, the thing is, like as Raquel brings up, Basil tries to be honest with her, and she sort of says, "Don't be honest with me. We're not married yet, so anything you tell me, I kind of will end up having to tell my father."
Yeah.
And if that's true, then like how are they meant to grow close and genuinely like fall in love if until the day they actually tie the knot, they're going to be sitting on this thing of like anything Basil confides to Raquel, she will have to forward to her father. Like that relationship is going to be poisoned until they could get married. Like they can't form a genuine connection under those circumstances.
Yeah, but I mean, Massa doesn't want them to really form a genuine connection, I don't think.
I I don't think he doesn't want them to form it. Like he probably just doesn't. It's not a high priority factor. Like them falling in love, as long as it's beneficial, is fine. But like like yeah, you're right. He's willing to sabotage that to protect the wider interests of the family or whatever the fuck. It's just like, as somebody who was trying to eke out a workable scenario from this situation, it was
Mm.
devastating to realize that like the concept that they could actually form a genuine connection was sabotaged from the beginning, even if you really wanted that to happen, which I don't, because again, the age gap here is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, let's
But
talk
yeah.
about that, right? Because the next thing that happens is Massa leaves for a moment, and Basil and Raquel have some time together, and Basil asks, like, what do you want?
Yeah, and God, like the second they actually start having a conversation, Abraham's like, "Oh, I'd better leave the room." It's like, oh, "Fuck you, you dickhead!" Like giving them some alone time. Like I fucking hate this guy.
um,
And he brings up his wife later. So just while we're talking
mm,
about the age gap stuff, it's worth pointing out. He brings up, so he's like what, in his 40s, like
yeah.
50s, I don't know. His wife was 19 a few years ago, so he's one of those like mid 40s dudes who's married like a 20-year-old, and it's just uh, he's consistent in this bullshit, but like no wonder this is the guy who's already grooming Raquel to start marrying people when she's 13.
Yeah, I mean, expectations were met, I suppose, on that one.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. He keeps talking about how it's really worked out for him because his new wife listens to what he says.
Oh,
Um,
great.
just oh fuck this guy so much.
Yeah. Um, but like, so yeah, I think we touched on this before. The saddest part of this is I think Raquel would convince herself over the course of staying with Basil that he's one of her best options, right? And that's pretty fucking tragic.
Yeah, I mean, Reed wanted her to have that, try and find a good husband to get away from the family, and Basil
Hmm.
legitimately might be one of the best case scenarios on that front. I mean, obviously, the good plan is for Raquel to just get the fuck out of the family, go live in Kennet, but like, if she's going to go
Yeah,
down this
that's a
route of,
real up and coming place.
it's better than the Mossa family.
Sure,
Um,
that's true.
Yeah, like I don't, well, yeah, this is just the whole thing, right? Is it's sort of like if she's going to go down this route, the sad truth is Basil is someone she can talk herself into doing this with because he legitimately might be one of the best options.
Mm, yeah, which is nice and grim. That's fun. Um, but yeah, I think Raquel calls out, most engagement prospects are nice at the start. So I think she's aware that, not to buy into to the bullshit from Basil. Not that it will necessarily make a difference in her decision, but at least there's that, I suppose.
Yeah, it was funny. Like on my first read through, at this point, I still trusted Basil because he'd handled everything pretty, as we said, like he did as well as he could without just telling Mossa to fuck off to his face.
Yeah.
Which I understand why he's not willing to do that. So I was like, at this point on my first read, I was like, don't worry, Raquel. Basil actually seems pretty good. I think he might be somebody who can live up to that standard. On my second read through, I read that and I was like, no, I think Raquel's on the money. Like, I think
Yep.
Basil thinks well of himself and means well at this stage. But just based on how we see him act in other things, I think he's just a bit delusional about how good he is as a person.
Yep. Exactly right. So yeah, the gang all gathers. The 11 Ocean's Mussa's 11. And Mussa starts to run through his plan. He's planning a heist, except it's not a casino. They're going to be heisting lordships.
Yeah, I mean, I love this because this is a world where narrative like matters in universe. So of course we're getting like the big, like this is the plan heist scene thing because it's in their dramatic interests to have this big meeting where Muscle lays out a big fucking map and is like, this is what we're taking.
Yep. Classic cinematic moment. Um, hey, yeah, Nicolette's here. Uh, Agreeing to work with Mussa, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and assuming like this is the sort of sensible play where, she can be of better service to everyone by being in the room.
Yeah, by being at the table, for sure.
Yeah, like, she openly challenges people a number of times here. Like, Anthem Ted is going to later casually suggest killing Liberty's favorite goblins to knock her out of this bad like phase. And Nicolette is the one who sort of stands up and is like, "Hey, fucking don't." And then she's also the one who kind of says to Masa, "You can do this plan, but it will be terrible." Like she's making sure she's in the room and she is kind of pushing back on the worst parts of all this and hopefully feeding information to the Kenneteers.
Yeah, I was about to think a similar thing. I would assume that Massa has set up the wording of his agreement with Nicolette a little bit more strictly than that, though. But yeah,
Yeah, who fucking knows? It might be overconfident or something. We'll see.
yeah,
Um, like he might bank on the fact that he thinks she'll want to keep his business. Like why? Um,
mm.
so it's just worth pointing out why is once again away on a project. I fucking love this guy's ability to just be like, I don't want to be in this story.
Yeah. I mean, you got to respect that he doesn't want to hang out with Massa so
Yeah,
much that he's going off and just keeping himself busy with other stuff.
like he managed to dodge all of the shit in arcs like 5 to 7 at the Blue Heron Institute. And then he let himself get entangled in Kennet during arcs 12 and 13,
You
and he's clearly
fool.
learned his lesson, and he's
Yep.
back to, oh, I have projects very far away. Like this
Yep.
is the fucking best augur in the story because he's managed to augur his way out of the fucking story.
Yeah, 100%. Very good.
Um, so just while we're talking about people who aren't here, it's worth noting that Zed and Bree
Yes.
are MIA, which obviously I hope for their sakes they went with Ray. Like, I'll be
Mm,
disappointed that Zed's not in the story anymore, but for his own benefit, I hope he went with Ray wherever the fuck Ray's gone that's out of this area.
yeah, hopefully. I don't think Zed and Brie are gone from the story forever. Just
Yeah.
not right here, right now. Which is fine. They need to focus on making sure Brie is okay.
Yeah, they have better shit to do. Like, I'm okay with them just fucking off out of the region for a couple of arcs.
Mm, yeah. Um, Florin's here too.
Of course
And
he's our new best friend.
yes, and on that, he doesn't go along with the plan. I mean, he doesn't go against the plan, but he also doesn't go along with the plan, which is nice. I think it would be
Yeah,
pretty
we'll
tragic if
take
he
it.
and Avery were at odds so quickly.
Oh yeah, no, of course. Like Avery's just made one new really good friend in Thunder Bay, and it's Florin.
Yep.
Yeah, I no, I mean, obviously, Florin is continuing to be set up as just somebody who's gonna be a fucking mess in this later, and I can't wait. Uh,
Yeah, who knows where he's gonna fall, and I think that's wonderful.
exactly, he's sort of got every side not against him. Like he's very much somebody who's just going to be able to pick a side when it matters and help really tip the scales in favor of whoever he picks. And the thing
Yeah.
is, we're not going to realize he's tipped the scales until well after he does it because he's a puppeteer. So it's going to be like when we realize what Florin's up to, it's going to be after he's set it all in motion. And I can't wait.
Yeah, 100%. Um, I mean, the thing worth touching on with this plan is like we knew that what Charles was doing would lead to a worse establishment. I said it a million times, and it's just exactly what's happening. So fuck you, Charles. You're a piece of shit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like fucking all of Kennett was telling Charles, like, this is the biggest Pikachu face moment ever for Charles, where it's a bit like, well, yes, this is what everyone said was going to happen, you fucking numpty. I will give Charles the benefit of the doubt here. I think he knew this was, especially if Marissa is still helping him
Yeah.
out,
Is this a part of the plan? Is the
or
question, right?
or not necessarily part of the plan, but like something they knew were coming, and they are ready for it. Like there's
Mm.
this chapter really does establish that there's a bit of a chess game going on between Charles slash Marisica and Massa slash everyone he's got under his thumb.
Well, and Rook.
Um,
Rook and Miss
yeah,
are
well,
pulling their weight too.
I think they're kind of just fucking around on the sideline, hoping to be underestimated until they can strike at the right time.
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
I think more actively around the region, we're kind of seeing, yeah, this match between Abraham and Charles with their associates, and so sort of thing. I bet you Charles knew this was coming, but well before Massa even really started putting this meeting together. And at the end of the chapter, we're obviously getting some changes in the plan, and I can guarantee that Massa knew it was coming, and I think Charles knew it was coming too. Like this is not done yet. This plan is going to keep evolving because so far it's all sort of been so predictable in how the pieces have fallen that I have to believe both sides knew it was getting to this point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's fair enough.
Um, so I guess to talk about some of the other characters we meet here, we obviously meet Marlon, who seems like really fun.
Yeah,
Her taste in men leaves something to be desired, because she seems
yeah.
mad keen on Basil. But
Is Marlon, because Marlon's been gainsaid for what 67 days or something now, right?
I thought it was like 100, but yeah,
Was it?
yeah,
It's like
whatever.
267. I don't know, but a long time. So Marlon might not be around in the story much more.
Oh, don't say that. She's so cool, and she'll get on with Avery because they're both like really thirsty and a bit detached from the world.
Yeah,
It's just such a cool concept. Like, obviously, we already talked briefly about like this cool new practice that we've met through Basil. And then like to find out Marlon is just somebody who kind of has made herself almost partially an echo, but not quite, and it lets her be this fucking great stealth operator. Like, that's just cool as hell.
okay, Marlon had 86 falsehoods laying at her feet, so presumably
Okay.
86 days of gainsaidness. So maybe she'll be around if we jump forward 3 months.
Yeah. I guess we'll see. She just
Mm.
seems really cool and fun, and I want to see more of her because she
Yeah.
just seems like a blast. And then obviously we finally meet Daddy Ted,
Big Ted.
Teddy. uh, yeah, I mean he's not quite what I expected, or I guess he kind of is, but just what a guy.
What a hero. Best father. Champion to the people. Love him.
I hate how excited Liberty was to see him. Like, she's
I
bouncing on the
know.
spot. She just wants to
Oh,
hug him. Like,
breaks your heart.
Raquel describes the Ted sisters as sweethearts earlier in this, and you see like Liberty is just clearly in awe at her dad still. And then she leaves, and he's like, "Oh, I'm thinking about killing her favorite goblins to get her in line." It's just, oh fuck this guy. Like,
Oh, what a piece of shit.
uh, and yeah, like clearly just fucking deadly too. Like he's this. I mean, there's a lot of organized crime involved in this chapter, and he's like a weapons dealer slash like they call him a trophy hunter, which I assume means that or he does like take scalps basically. Like he's clearly some sort of mob boss esque character, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, we don't know specifically what he does, but the fact that he associates with Musa and is called a trophy hunter is obviously not a great sign.
Yeah, I get the impression he's like less a one shtick wonder than a lot of the other practitioners here, and he kind of
Yes.
dabbles in a bunch of violence related practices.
Yeah, definitely the vibe I got from him
Uh
as well. I mean, he's referred to as like a weapons dealer as well, isn't he? Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I think like his kind of shtick, as much as he's got one, is leaning into like obviously he's named Anthem. His daughters are like America and Liberty. Like he's just kind of channeling like stupid nationalistic libertarian shit almost, and so, that leads to like the criminal sides of of that aspect of stuff, which is like like weapons dealing, like the trophy stuff leans into hunting and all that, like just being violent and kind of shitty.
yeah, yeah. He's very shitty in a very fun way.
Yeah. Um, it summarizes half the people at this table, I guess.
Yeah, true. So yeah, they take a break from the planning, and Basil just is going to go out to his car, but instead tries to work some theft magic against Ray.
Yeah, and this is where the cracks finally start to appear. Like up until now, I'd been so pro Basil, and then this starts, and it's like,
Hmm.
oh god, no,
Uh oh.
he's
Yeah.
tricked us.
Yeah. Basil has obviously been playing up the kind of like gentleman thief archetype, but this is pretty cold and heartless. Like stealing this stuff from Ray almost certainly would condemn Ray to death, right? So Basil is pretty happy to kill Ray for a few $1 million, which is not morally great, is my gut feel.
Well, and he seems to be holding a lot of anger towards Ray because I guess Ray didn't let him steal his shit. Like,
Yeah, what a
what are you
crime.
talking about? Like,
Yeah,
I'm like
how
this.
dare Ray
Yeah,
find out that I was planning to steal from him? Like, oh, yeah, you're right. How dare he?
like this is that same bullshit that's always in like mob movies. So like I'm thinking of John Wick, where it's like, oh, you killed my son, blah. It's like, yeah, but he was there trying to kill me. Like, I get that, like, in those mob sort of things, it's usually much more about like saving face for the gang or whatever. But, like, just the hypocrisy of, like, "You're not allowed to kill our people," and it's like, "What, so I was just supposed to let him kill me? Like, fuck off." Um,
Mm.
a and that's very much Basil's vibe here, like, he's going around securing all of his shit, making sure it can't get stolen, but fuck Ray for not letting him steal some of Ray's stuff, like, "He has enough to share, I want some of it," like, it's just bullshit.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's very ridiculous.
Yeah, and yeah, well, this is really yeah, where these cracks start to form, and you realize he's just a bit he's kidding himself about how honorable he actually is. He
Yeah,
just doesn't see himself for who he is.
he and Massa definitely are two peas in a pod. You know, he,
Yeah,
he he explicitly thinks about whether the practice is actually a harmful force, and then he puts that aside, and then he thinks to himself, "I'm becoming more like Massa,"
yeah,
as something not worth commenting on. So yeah, not great points for old Basil Brush here.
yeah. Well, because he has these thought that these kids are outside playing because they've been gainsaid, and he describes that as oh, they've been unshackled from like their families, and that makes them
Hmm.
or that allows them to be happy. But, you know, being happy doesn't pay the bills. Gotta go get rich and steal shit with Massa. And it's like, oh fuck, you were right there, mate.
So
Like you were so
close,
close.
so close, Basil.
Yeah, real like self-aware wolves moment
Yeah,
from
I was
Basil here.
thinking the exact same thing. He's a classic self werewolf.
Um,
Um,
but like this is the tragedy, right? Of like this is how you get Massa. Like, there's two ways to get Massas. Like we saw Reed's interlude is kind of the if you are raised so entrenched in this system, you just that's who you are. Like you've been raised like that. That
mm,
that that is who you have to become. And
yeah,
Basil is our kind of example of how somebody becomes a Massa, and it's somebody who's kind of a bit shitty, kind of a bit
yeah,
selfish, but you know, like the world puts him in a position where he is just so massively incentivized to foster those parts of himself. So like he has these moments and now he's but like he can't really dwell on them because he's just thinking, well, I want to get paid. I want like, you know, Massa to be beside me like that.
yeah.
This is how somebody becomes a Massa. And it's less forgivable than someone like Reed to me. Like
Oh yeah, Basil is an adult. Basil is making this decision intentionally. I've
yeah,
read kind of was,
Basil's
but also
choosing
was
this
much
life. Yeah.
younger. Yeah, exactly.
Like Reed never really had a chance. Basil has had these opportunities, is having these moments, and is choosing not to, and knowing what he's doing.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, we jump forward in time to this first territory being claimed, and almost no resistance is put up. It is taken
Hmm.
very cleanly and easily.
Yeah, it's just like a really cool ritual to see as well. Like we get all these little details on like quotes from Solomon's contract and stuff. Like there's lots of little interesting lore droplets here. Seeing the ritual itself is really cool. Like it seems to be quite similar to how the domain ritual has been described.
Mm,
Like we still haven't seen a domain ritual, so we don't know what they're like. But I remember the core part of those was like Verona was telling us you put out a challenge and everyone gets to come fight you. So it seems like
yeah.
since this is a similar-ish land claim, just like a less permanent one,
Mm,
obviously it is very similar in design. Like I don't know how much different the domain one would be, but this feels like our first insight into sort of how that would go if Verona wants to try and claim a domain at some point.
yeah. 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 It just goes so smoothly, the first one. Um,
Hmm.
because we jump forward and we're now on like the 10th ritual or so. There's a series of them happening at the same time. And this time they do not go as smoothly because Charles shows up and Gain says Millie Legendre for 436 days.
Oh, it's I loved this. Like I know it's Charles and like that what he's doing is kind of, you know, pouring oil on the fire, but fuck it was fun to watch.
Yeah. Um I I was really kind of thinking, hey, do I actually want this crew to succeed? And I wasn't sure. And then Charles shows up and I'm like, now again, don't know quite how to feel about this, but I do like where it's going. I do like that, as long as they spend their energy fighting each other, it sounds like a win to me.
Yeah, it was very much a like let them fight moment for me where it was like, yeah, if Charles wants to 1v1 the shittiest practitioners, I'll allow it.
Yeah.
It
Good luck,
yeah.
Charles. Knock 'em dead.
I mean, this definitely is starting to feel like what we encountered in the Blue Heron Institute arcs, like 5 to 7, where it's very much like, these are our Bristow and Alexander, and what we need is Kennett to just slip in at the clutch moment, sort of steal victory away from both of them, but then also make sure that they don't put Musser in charge this time, because that's what happened last time, and it's how we ended up back here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, as long as they fight each other and take each other mostly out, we'll just come in and do a little bit of cleanup crew at the very end, and that's fine.
Yeah, but like, what happened with the Blue Heron Institute when the Kennetys did this last time is they didn't have their replacement lined up, which meant Musser came in and made things worse. And this is why that final line from Lucy in 14.6 was so important, because that was where Lucy
Yeah.
was like, "We need to pick who's going to be the new
Yeah.
Carmine."
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean that'll be, and I don't think, I think Charles and probably Abraham are smart enough that they won't just let Kennett come in and like steal the win. Like,
Mm.
I don't think Kennett's going to be able to fly that under the radar. That we'll get many more of these like moves, like what Rook is about to pull, where Kennett just kind of doesn't get noticed and they can pull sneakies. Like, they will get attention at some point. I don't think they're going to get that clutch moment where they get to come in and defeat both teams. It's going to be harder than that.
Yeah, that's definitely my thought as well. They're not just going to immediately, be able to be there at the right moment and win. They're going to need to
Yeah.
contribute a bit more too. But we've kind of seen that a few times. We saw like when the Witch Hunters and Musa was in
Yeah.
town, like having to play both sides a bit. Like that definitely feels like where Kennett can exist, and kind of has to
Yeah, you're
exist
right.
because they're probably not powerful enough to win the fight with two other, forces on their own.
Yeah, and that's another great example of where Kennett was trying to play the third team. But you're right. Like, first of all, they didn't not get attention, so they took as many losses as the other sides did almost.
Mm.
But also they didn't really have a plan. Like, their plan was just to try and keep both those sides busy. Like, they, there wasn't a next step of, oh, and now we've defeated them and can do this.
Yeah, I don't think they really knew what they were going to go for after they had won, right?
Yeah, the plan was just to keep both sides kind of fighting each other because they couldn't really fight either one. Like, but that was a stopgap solution.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, like I hate to say it, but I was kind of rooting for Charles here. Like I was
Oh yeah.
cheering a bit when Charles showed up.
Oh, it's like the better version of, like, remember that one moment when Charles was started fighting John, and he had that one moment where John just attacked him. It was like, you don't deserve to be here, blah blah, and Charles got to drop the "that's my whole fucking point" line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this is just the even better version of that, because Charles shows up and he's just blatantly abusing the core tenets of the practice. Like, he's
Yep.
like, I have decided to punish you now for 400 and whatever, gainsayers, starting from now. And, like, Braxton comes in, he's like, you're making the practice a farce. And you can just tell Charles is like, fucking yeah, I am. Like, it
Yeah,
already is.
exactly. Charles giggling to himself at that, like
Like,
100%.
he's just coming in and blatantly using, like, the Constitution's, like, rules against it, because we hate this Constitution. You just can't help but be like, "Oh, fucking go to town." Like, I know this isn't
Yeah.
helpful, big picture and all that, but, like,
Yeah.
it's really fun seeing the worst parts of this system get turned against the worst people in the system.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so Millie is out. So Basil steps up and decides to claim the lordship. Charles doesn't stop him, but some others do, including Rook, who puts a simple box challenge to Basil.
Yeah.
Luckily, Basil passes and wins the lordship.
Yeah, easy peasy. I mean, Rook showing up and just offering the, like, fucking ball in a cup challenge to him is just the most Oni shit ever. Like,
Hmm.
it's so,
It's such
it's
a
so
mind
great.
fuck. I love it. Yeah,
Oh,
Rook showing up the moment where, because like obviously in the previous chapter, Rook says, "Oh, I have to go off and do something," and I was kind of like, "Oh, I'm sure we'll find out what that is eventually," and then we see it immediately after, like, "Oh, this is what Rook is here to stop." Like, and because Rook's whole deal is defeating challenges exactly like this one, it's just like so perfect, especially because in a moment for a moment you think Rook hasn't done anything. You're kind of like, wait, Rook showed up and there was a whole big deal and we were expecting her to stop the challenge and she didn't. And I was like, oh, this is awesome.
yeah. Yeah, I can't really add to that. It's just you're just like, oh, of course she's here to stop a giant land claim.
Yeah.
Um, because actually, sorry, something I meant to bring up before, but kind of forgot to. You know who suddenly isn't at the table as well when we're discussing big land claims in Canada?
Mm.
Jessica and like any Indigenous Canadians,
Yeah,
which
good
just
point.
really sort of sells the whole vibe of Musser's plan. Is I can pretty much guarantee to you that everyone in that room was white.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's very the colonial overtones of it are very tangible, aren't they?
Yeah, and this is what Charles has done is he's now created a situation where like more conquest of Canada is happening basically.
Yeah, yeah. It's inherently a situation where the the disenfranchised are the people that are really going to suffer because we've got just people fighting over land that they think they have a right to, which is kind of fucked up.
Yeah. I'm easily impressed. Just brought up in the chat how this or somebody in Reddit brought up that this corresponds to like the carving up of Africa,
Mm,
and I'd say the Middle East too, like after World War Two, or maybe World War One. My history is terrible, but yeah, just like when we have all these like Western white powers being like, these are the countries in these continents that realistically we've never been to,
yeah.
and yeah,
We can just carve these up for our own strategic gains, paying no attention to the cultures that exist here.
yep, and
Because
yeah,
it's just
and that.
land that we can treat as a resource.
Yeah, and then, like, my understanding is that, like, a lot of the messes in the Middle East can, like, quite substantially be attributed to the fact that, like, these divisions were drawn in ways that, like, grouped cultures that were entirely disparate together or cut in the middle of some of them, like, just, yeah, really fucking it all up.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's what Musser and Co are doing, like, now, essentially.
Yep. Um, so yeah, I mean, again, it is fun just having them be at each other's throats. Reading this the second time around and trying to figure out exactly when Bridge came in, and like, there's that moment where Basil stands up, another challenger is coming, and then kind of nobody shows up, and he sits back down, and I'm like, oh, there we go, there it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, this is
Good
one of
stuff.
those plans that was very delightful to reread because
Mm,
when you reread it knowing what's coming, you just like pick apart the details and you're like, oh, nice.
yeah,
Which that was definitely that was Pact's bread and butter, and you always love to see it impale too.
yeah. But yeah, so Abraham Musa celebrates their victory, unaware that there is now a spy in the midst.
Oh yeah, Rook, you sneaky motherfucker! Like,
Yep, Rook really delivered there.
And like because this feels like we saw earlier in the chapter like Tanner was like Florin will be important for the start of the plan, and like I
Mm,
have to assume this was a significant chunk of where that prophecy thing was coming from because Florin feels like the person who would be able to notice someone like Bridge being involved here.
yeah, yeah. But Floren's not involved, so it's not going to
Yeah.
happen, which is pretty great. So
um
now we get to watch Abraham's plan slowly fall apart, and I am delighted for that.
So yeah, and like so, it's worth pointing out. This is the part where I was sort of like, oh, okay. So like what happens here is Abraham at the end here is kind of like, oh, well, now that Charles is working against our claims, clearly what happens is I'll have to do all of them and then like abdicate them. And I was like, this was your plan the whole fucking time, wasn't it? Because now, like, if he's the one who makes the claims, does the fighting, and then like abdicates it, I feel like he still has some level of claim because he's
Yeah,
like
some
when you
claim over it
abdicate,
for sure.
it feels like you're kind of saying, "Oh, I allow you to be in charge of the domain that I have secured." And this is like a
Yeah,
really clever move by Abraham because what he's sort of done is not been the one who was making the claims, but oh no, Charles has forced his hand and now he has to be the one to do all of them. And this isn't ideal as far as he's concerned, but oh well. And it just reads as such bullshit to me. But then the other side of this chess match is that like Charles and if she's involved, especially Marisica, have to have known that this is what Abraham would do in response to Charles moving when he did.
I kind of want to see Charles just gainsay Mussa because, yes, he said he wouldn't, but while he was forsworn, and Marcy's nowhere to be seen, Marcy was the collateral, but Marcy's fucked right off. So, who gives a shit?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because the beautiful thing about that exact arrangement is we didn't seem to get the exact phrasing. We got Lucy's like
Yeah,
rushed, hurried translation, um, which no doubt means that we can't know the specifics. But yeah, like if Marissa can just run away from Abraham? Doesn't that like mean that she's kind of out of it? I mean, then there was all the other stuff. I know a lot of people were theorizing that if she manages to become not technically a fairy anymore, part of the promise seemed to be like a fairy in bloom. So was it phrased in
yeah.
such a way that if she's no longer a fairy, she's no longer beholden
Yeah, or
to
she
it?
can like make a different fairy do his dirty work for a year or whatever it was. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Oh yeah. She said fairy, but she was spelling it AIRY. And so she's going to give him one of the little fairies in full
that would
bloom.
be perfect.
um, yeah. I don't know. Like again, I'm so interested to continue to track this Abraham versus Charles chess match that's going on across a whole province and a bit of Canada. As like, because I have to believe that both of them knew that this point we've reached. Like they knew that we were going to get here from day one. I think Musser knew the second he split everyone up, Charles would make his move, but he was counting on getting to be the one to make all the claims. And Charles must
Yeah,
have known that Musser would make that his next move. So I can't wait to see what Charles has next. Like, this is a great point to end the chapter because I think this is the point where both of them could have logically sat down and assumed we'd get here very easily. So now we've sort of reached the point where, as a reader, I'm like, I don't quite know what the moves are from here. And I'm excited
yeah.
for
What
that to be the
happens
next
next?
stage.
It's going to get a lot messier, and hopefully that means a lot more collateral damage on both sides.
Yep.
Um, but that's the end of 14Z. Probably the end of the arc, but we don't know that for sure yet because it's been a very short arc. If that's the case, the shortest yet.
Yeah, although it is following on from one that was about double the normal length. So,
Yeah,
you know,
true.
I could see it just, being a bit short.
Yeah, as Rook said, we got to rest and recuperate, and that applies to Bo as well.
Yeah. Also, it is worth pointing out, people are bringing up in the chat, and like in terms of word count, it is actually very similar to like
True.
most of the like first 6 or 7 arcs.
Yeah.
Just in chapter count, I think it's 7 chapters as which is just 2 or 3 chapters shorter than average.
Yeah. Anyway, uh, so yeah, I guess now before we wrap up our episode, we should pull out some predictions as we are in this cool new phase of the story. We've got a lot of predictions about what could be happening next. These are predictions that have been left in our Pale Predictor form by the community. If you want to leave a prediction, you can find the link to do that in the show notes down below.
Yeah. So what have you got for us?
I've put out a prediction by Enchanted Compass. Their prediction is effectively that the Kennet Trio will somehow get control of this coalition of lordships and change them fundamentally to turn the kind of monarchical structure of the lordship into more democratic states, where these are like, almost analogous to a state system of like, the US or whatever, or anywhere that's broken into states like that, hopefully without an electoral college, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
that kind of vibe, with like local government and more senior government, but in a democratic way instead of a Bristolian way, um, which I like. The reason I put out this theory is like these lordships, once they exist, like they exist, right? Like I don't think I have a full grasp of how the lordship stuff works, but from the stuff that was spoken about, it's meant to be a pretty big deal, which would mean, are these like permanent lordships that exist forever now? In that case,
Uh,
something needs to happen with them in the story. Like they can't just be, Millie Legendre can't just be the lord of Nipongo or whatever. I can't remember the name of the small town,
yeah,
but
it was like
that
Nippy Gong.
Nipigon, yeah. Like
I
that can't
thought,
just be it, right? Like something's got to
yeah,
happen with these.
I thought there was a moment where they were saying that they can just dissolve some of them.
Right.
But now that I'm thinking that, maybe they were just talking about, like, selling it to someone or whatever.
Yeah, I think they were talking
Um,
about abdicating or selling it to whoever came along that could adhere to the rules, not dissolving the
yeah.
lordship, which feels like, you know, claims of lordship are like permanent changes from a other-ish system to a practitioner-ish system.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some sort of, thing as well, like, because if a lordship is traditionally meant to imply, like, this place is, like, big and human-owned territory now or whatever, then like, if you can dissolve a lordship, that is basically them saying, "Oh, this isn't really human-owned space anymore," and I wonder if that
Mm,
has, like, this impression to the universe that it's a place that's falling down, and so, like, that
mm,
financially would hurt the people in the towns or whatever.
mm. Yeah,
Um
yeah, but like that's the reason I pulled out this prediction is I don't think I really had thought about it, but this is a permanent step in the direction of pushing out others. And so I feel like the story needs a way to reconcile that when we reach
Yeah.
the eventual finale.
Well,
So
and I
I
think
like this idea.
I think the other side of this is like what they sort of bring up is that we have these lordships, but really the lords aren't that accountable to the council. Like they're only accountable to the council insofar as like they need to keep everyone in line. Like it's
Well,
a
so that they
very
don't get deposed.
yeah,
It's a very
it's very
kind of feudal, yeah.
monarchical. Yeah, yeah. Like as long as they have power to enforce their will, they can do whatever.
Yeah.
So the idea that like shifting away from that to like better representing something where you have like the Lord is just executive, but the council is more like legislative.
Mm,
So that they actually have the ability to tell the Lord like no in a way that's a bit more democratic and not just them needing to sort of have the power. Like the power should just be inherent to their role as the council, not like something that they need to be able to back in a fight.
mm,
I really sort of like that idea. And then yeah, the judges being the judiciary is in saying the judges don't have to be beholden exclusively to places that aren't lordships, but like trying to bring them into also the human places.
yeah, yeah.
Like because
There's
as
yeah, that's
humans of what
probably the middle ground that we could find.
yeah, because what Mrs. talked about, like, from super early on in the story, I think it was, like, 5.D actually, was, like, when she sort of said, Solomon's rules kind of made sense when humanity were, like, little fireside camps spread around the world. Now we have these giant cities and stuff, and, like, that's why things like lordships are able to get twisted like what Musser is doing.
Mm,
So, revisiting the whole idea of the judges exist outside of the lordships kind of makes sense because the relationship between humans and the spaces that don't have humans has fundamentally changed.
mm.
Like if you think about it, Kennet would have been a big civilization when Solomon's stuff was like written down.
Yeah, yeah. Or at least more relevant, I suppose.
Yeah. So I don't know how this goes with like amendments to Solomon's constitution or whatever, but I love the idea of letting the judges be more involved in some way in even the lordships beyond just being a pressure that is exerted externally.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. What could a different equilibrium look like? It's a core question that we don't have an answer to, but
Yeah.
maybe one day.
So
Yeah,
I've
what
pulled
did
out a
yeah.
prediction from Beleg Tal,
Mm-hmm.
who had a really good thought that basically a Shumere will somehow become it has something to do with Basil's practice. Like basically, I think the pull out is that like a Shumere being one of these like I don't know how to pronounce it, like Bugains or bugs or whatever, like the things that got described in 14.z, like a Shumere being somehow related to that practice makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm,
They kind of have that vibe of being something to do with stories that are told. I think they called themselves like something to do with kids getting blamed or whatever. So if there's some sort of
mm,
manifestation of like a weird children related urban legend, I think that makes sense. Um,
mm,
so I really like that connection. And then they also predict that in terms of fighting Basil and or Shimere, Verona's old quill pen will be quite integral. Uh,
I like that.
which yeah, because we haven't seen that thing for a while. In fact, I think it got broken at one point. So assuming it gets fixed, I really like it as a tool that will come back and be very specifically able to target someone like Basil.
Yeah, by rewriting the story or using that to change the fundamental rules of the thing that you're dealing with, which I'm pretty sure was the premise for an episode of Owl House. So if maybe we can check that out for some more ideas of how this might go down.
Sure.
um, yeah, good predictions. Uh, So thanks, folks, for leaving them in the form. Again, if you want to put them down, you can find the link in the show notes down below. In the show notes below, you can also find the link to our discussion thread, which is where you can leave your answers to our current discussion question. Which of the Thunder Bay Council do you feel Avery should be the most concerned about? We'll be getting to the answers for that next week.
Yep, we've already got some great answers to that one, some smart ass answers too that were very fun. So yeah, get your answers in before next week.
Yeah. And if you want, you can also check out our Twitter at PowerReflectCast, which is where you'll see live reads and all kinds of bits and bobs like that. So make sure you head on over
Yes.
there to engage more with the show.
Hopefully my work will calm down and I can start doing those at the time I said I was going to do them again and not 12 hours before this recording.
Yeah, good times.
Yes, don't forget to stop by doofmedia.com as well if you want to learn more about the other shows on the Doof network. Like, remember, there's Pale in Comparison if you're not getting enough enough Otherverse in this. We also have Doof After Dark is our new show. If you're listening to the live recording, as Ruben said, we'll be recording one of those right after this.
Yeah, that's accessible to all patrons. So go to patreon.com/doofmedia and become a patron to check it out. You can also subscribe to your custom Patreon RSS feed so they can come straight into your podcast player, just like a regular old podcast would, which is a very fun feature that Patreon does. So make sure to take advantage of it. I think that the way to the instructions for how to do that are linked in every Doof After Dark's show notes.
Yes.
So you can check that out.
Yes, please don't ask us how to do it. It's in every show notes of every one of those episodes.
Yeah.
Don't forget to stop by Wildbow's Patreon either, patreon.com/Wildbow. Us giving him money like this is the only thing stopping him from claiming all of Canada.
Yeah. So to hold the fearsome Conqueror Wabo back, make sure you head to Patreon and support his campaign. That doesn't quite track. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. Goodbye.